their total health and health and well-being. And so in order to think about that, it's important that we're looking at some of what the research says, which is that whenever there's transitions, kids and families tend to experience the highest levels of stress. So transitions tend to bring stress. And one of the reasons that we are hosting this session and really promoting it across, the community is that we know from the research and we know from the trends that oftentimes the mental health impact, we tend to not see that until about 6 months post-disaster. I don't exactly know when the end date is for COVID, hopefully sooner rather than later. But I'm sharing this data as a reason that we're hosting this session to make sure that we keep on the forefront that our general community often thinks that once things are kind of, we're back in the classroom and things have resolved some, that things are just going to be better. And oftentimes it's at that point when people come out of survival mode and reflect back on like, what was that? What happened? And processed all of the events of that period of time. And so this is actually data from Cody Kinsley, who is the Deputy Secretary at DHHS, that is sharing this across the state. And we wanted to share this across our meeting as well to really focus on the fact that it'll be really important to attend to the mental health and well-being of our students and families and teachers and community for a while still, as folks are continuing to cope with the impacts of COVID. Some of our partners at the National Federation of Families have put out some data that continue to confirm that not only are caregivers and their children have an increase of symptoms, but the access to mental health services, particularly right now, is more and more challenging. And for our providers on the call, I imagine you can attest to that it is really hard to call anywhere that doesn't have a pretty long wait list right now. We got a call from somebody yesterday that said it was a 6-month wait list at another agency that they reached out to. And so obviously, if a family's in crisis or really struggling, that makes it really challenging to be able to address quickly. So all of that to say, what we know is what's predictable is preventable. If we know that there could be, that there is an uptick in mental health and there could continue to be an uptick as COVID continues, it's really essential for us. The time really was like yesterday, but in terms of preventing it moving forward as people begin to get back into the school system, we really need to be thinking about this now. And so this conversation is really a hope-filled conversation around how we can continue to support and mitigate the impact as much as we can. And in order to do that, we're going to have to do it together, which is, the approach that we believe in at the Kellen Foundation, and I imagine everyone on this call believes in. Kids and families and teachers, we don't live in vacuums, we live in community. And so it's really important for all of us across the community to be part of the conversation and part of the solutions as well. And so as we continue, we're going to move into our panel now, and our panel is hosted by Mary Herbenik, who is our Resiliency Coordinator and Development Director at the Kellen Foundation. And she'll introduce you to our panelists and we'll get this conversation started. Mary?
Thank you, Kelly. And I am so excited about this conversation today from many perspectives. As a parent of a child transitioning into college and then one who is in high school, as an advocate for children in this community and for educators, and then also from the Kellen Foundation's perspective, because this is probably the most important conversation we can be having right now as we get ready for the rest of August. So I'm delighted that we have such a talented group of panelists from our community, and they represent different parts of the lifespan and different perspectives that they'll bring to the table and to this conversation. So we're going to start at the beginning, and I'll run through the panelists first, and then we'll start the conversation. So Joy Herrera from Bringing Out the Best, which is an early childhood organization. Kelly McCormick, who is an elementary school teacher with Guilford County Schools and Kellen Kids Coordinator. Rashard Jones from Communities and Schools in Greensboro, talking to us about the middle schoolers and what they are working with and dealing with. Lisa Taylor from the Kellen Foundation, who's our CRI child and family advocate, and will be representing a parent perspective in the community. And then Kenya Donaldson, who is the president of the Guilford County Association of Educators. And we're delighted to hear from the teacher perspective what's needed in the coming year. So as I said, we're going to start at the beginning of the lifespan, and we've given some framing questions to each one of our panelists today. You'll also have the opportunity to ask some questions, so we ask that you hold those until the end of the panel, but write them down so that you don't forget. And then we'll also be looking at the chat throughout. So we'll turn it over to Joy to really talk about an overview of yourself and the organization, and then the unique aspects of how COVID has affected children in the birth to 5 space, and then what's needed to facilitate a good transition into the school year. So we'll turn it over to you, Joy.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm, like Mary said, from Bringing Out the Best. We're a program who serves preschool children. We make home visits and school visits to try to support children socially, emotionally, and with any behavior issues that they may have. And so a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today are things that you've probably already heard about, that you're aware of, but try to think of these things through the lens of the preschool experience, this tiny little person and their family as they, branch out into the world and have so many needs and all of those kinds of things. So the first question that we were asked is, what is unique about the way COVID may have impacted this specific population? So what I'm hearing a lot from parents and teachers are the levels of anxiety and depression that they're experiencing. And what is really troublesome is they're seeing the same things in the children, in their homes and in their classrooms. So, not only are the children having all of these feelings, but I think that they're kind of absorbing the feelings that the adults are having. So that's a huge worry that we're hearing across the board. Also, some children are losing family members and or acquaintances, and others are being exposed to conversations about death and illness due to COVID, as they're hearing the news, as they're hearing the adults in their lives discuss what's happening in the world. And this is just leading to a greater and greater level of worry and fear that children shouldn't be exposed to at any age, but especially at such a young age. Something else that is very worrisome is the shortages of teachers and staff in childcare centers. Centers are having difficulty finding people to work, especially competent and experienced people. This is leading to parents scrambling to find a placement for their child. It's leading to directors worried about, do we close down? Do we send some children away? What do we do with this situation? And just last week, a director called me and said that 2 of her teachers walked out mid-morning and never came back. And so can you imagine what the chaos that was going on in that center as they're trying to figure out, we need to stay in ratio. We have to have someone in charge of these children. The children are wondering, where did my teacher go? What's going on? So all of these things are very difficult. In the classroom, children are unable to learn about and interpret facial expressions. So as they're really needing to learn about emotions, how to recognize them, label them, process them, that ability is gone in many cases. And this is such a crucial period for that learning, and it's just not able to happen. Other experiences, such as sensory experiences, for example, playing in a sandbox, due to COVID regulations, that's been taken away. A lot of the sensory materials are being taken away because of the worry for spread of germs. As Kelly was talking about, the wait lists for services for speech, special education, occupational therapy, evaluations, behavioral interventions. The wait lists are very lengthy. And so these children at this crucial point in their life are lacking these services. And some parents are fearful to even take their children for these services. I just spoke to a family last week who their children has a lot of medical concerns, and they live with older family members. So they're not going out. They are not going to enroll their child in speech and OT. The risk is just not worth it to them. So think again about what that child is missing out on. They're also missing out on valuable social experiences due to distancing and lesson play dates or no play dates. And a big one, virtual therapy sessions are reported as being very difficult and ineffective for this age group. They cannot maintain the attention of a child on a screen. That child wants to play and roam around the house. It's very hard to get them engaged. And the second question is, what does the specific population need to facilitate a smooth transition into the new year? So with preschoolers, we always want to give a lot of visuals. We want to prepare their little brains in the best way that we can. So I would say that this upcoming school year is going to be especially challenging. Some of the children have been out for a year. Some of them have never had that preschool experience, and so they're landing in a classroom for the very first time. So it's beneficial for children and families to meet their teachers, build relationships with those teachers. If they can do a tour of the school, get a picture to take home of the teacher that they can keep. If teachers can make home visits or hold some sort of virtual meeting, that would be great. And something else that parents can do to ease anxieties is make a calendar and count down the days with their child. Big red X's on the calendar. You know, this day is over and now we have 10 more days until school starts. That's a great visual to set those expectations. And speaking about anxiety, as we were before, parents need to check in on their children's anxiety levels, just in general, but also in terms of the upcoming school year. This can be done by talking, doing art, movement activities, just really trying to find out what's going on in their little minds. And if needed, then counseling may need to take place. And parents need to check in on their own anxiety levels and get help for themselves if they need it. Because what's happening is the children are absorbing those anxieties. What's wrong with mommy? What's wrong with daddy? What's wrong with my caregiver? What's wrong with me? So it's very important to check in with everyone involved. And, you know, something that's so positive and something that, you know, we know from Fred Rogers is adults can talk about the good that's happening in the world. Where are the helpers? Who can we look to? Where's the inspiration? And also they can talk to children about what we can control. Let's focus on what we can control. Let's be in this moment and not worry about what could happen. And the last thing that I would add, something that's dear to my heart, is something called special time. So this is a time that is child directed, a time where everything stops, the phones go away, the TV gets turned off, we're not cooking dinner. If we're talking about the classroom, the teacher may need to get some help and focus on one child at a time. To ask that child, what would you like to play with? What would you like to do with me? What can we play? What's your favorite activity? And just spend 5 or 10 minutes with that child. And you are absorbed in their world. It's all about them. It's all about connection at that moment. And just 5 or 10 minutes can make such a difference to that child. It builds bonds. It makes them feel special. It makes them feel important, eases their anxieties. We get so caught up in what we need to do during the day. We're physically there with those children, but we don't always take the time to stop and talk and play. And we especially don't take the time to ask the child, what would you like to do? So those are the few ideas that I had.
Joy, thank you so much. And, so many takeaways. And there's a question in the chat if folks want to share some things that they took away from Joy's presentation. So many great tips and tools, and we'll share that with everybody after the fact as well. And I just appreciate that and the reminder that connections matter so deeply. So thank you so much. And as we build the bridge and move along the lifespan, we're going to turn it over to Kelly McCormick, who will talk a little bit about elementary school experiences.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelly, and I am beginning my 19th year this year teaching for GCS. My experience has been teaching 1st through 4th grade, and I'm also the Kellen Kids coordinator just recently, but I'm excited to be here, and I'm going to talk about some of the same points that Joy touched on. She brought up some great areas, and they kind of extend into this age group of children. And if you're like myself, you've probably read article after article on COVID, about transitioning back to school and its effects and things like that. And I try to make sure as an adult too in my household, whether I'm at home or in a school building, that, it's something that like Joy said, you don't want to expose children necessarily to those conversations or your fears, because they do feed on that anxiety at such a young age and pick up on that. So we have to be good role models for them during this time. So when school starts back this year, social emotional learning is going to be a super important area that we really need to focus on and put in the forefront in our classrooms, whether you are going back in person or virtual. My first 17 years I was in person, and then last year I was virtual, and this upcoming school year I will be virtual as well. So I'll give you some ideas on how to deal with both, or things that you can use in the classroom or in virtual online relationships. So a morning routine is extremely important, no matter, like I said, which environment you're in, if you're online or inside a real classroom. So having a morning meeting or a group session in the morning just to welcome children in, greeting them is super important. And one really great tool to greet children, especially in elementary school, is to greet them at the door. You want to greet them before they come into your classroom and have, a smile on your face. And there's some different ways. And I know with COVID, we want to be careful with touching, but elementary kids kind of need that. So we have to, try to be careful about how we do it. But one awesome way that a lot of teachers have started in the last year or two, even during COVID, in the states that have gone back, were to put, like Joyce said, children are visual, especially at a younger age, but a lot of teachers will put pictures by their door, such as a heart or a music note or a hand for a high five. And as kids are coming in, ask them, and they'll point to one of those pictures so that the teacher can either do like a little dance with them or high five or elbow, or, and if they're one of those kids that need a hug, if we're in the position or feel comfortable enough to do that, just that greeting at the door helps set the tone for the day. And I do that on the screen as well, actually, with my students virtually in the mornings during a morning meeting, just to see how everybody's feeling before they start their day. It's important. You never know how they're going to come to you from home, what their experience was that first hour or two they were awake, what kind of situation they came from. So it's super important to start the day, with a good attitude and see where the students are at. So that is an excellent greeting for K2 students. And it's also important with those older kids, 3-5, who might not want to, might not be into that want to check in with you in a different way. I have found that in my years of teaching, a lot of children, whether they're K2 or 3-5, they don't have the social emotional vocabulary necessarily available at all times to express how they're feeling. So we have to work on having those conversations with them, creating a check-in board. You could do that virtually as well, like with a Google poll. iPads, you can do it, have students check off how they're feeling that day. It can be part of their morning routine. They come in, check in, hang up their backpack, and either you have a check-in board, and it can be anonymous. They can use sticky notes with their name on the back. You can make it fun with different emojis. You can have some words on there like I'm feeling fine, or it's a smiley face, or I need to check in, I'm not having such a great day, or I'm feeling, a little down. I need to talk to someone. And then they can move their sticky note as part of their check-in routine in the morning, and the teacher can check in with those students. Like Joy was saying, just having a couple of minutes with each student sometime throughout the day. Hey, how are you feeling? What's going on? Can you tell me, what's bothering you? Or can you tell me something positive that's happened to you today? Checking in with them to see what their emotional well-being is, because it can change from day to day. And with little kids, or K5 or even teens, it can change from hour to hour because you don't know exactly what they're thinking, what's going on in other situations around home or in school, or sometimes we don't see everything that's going on. So to get an idea of what they're feeling and experiencing in their head, and giving them some of that vocabulary, and also letting them know it's okay to talk about these things, giving that vocabulary, because what I see a lot of times with K5 or even teenagers in middle school, they know how to act out their feelings, they know how to show anger, but they don't always necessarily know how to talk about it or deal with it or process it. They know how to show sadness, or if they're depressed, a lot of times we can pick up on things like that, but they don't always want to talk about it or know that it's okay to talk about it. So let them knowing that by doing a check-in board with the older kids is a great way. Like I said, it can be electronic, it can be like a Google poll, it can be, on a classroom board, and it can change from time to time. So um, and then again, I think it's also important to touch base. If you're in a classroom before kids go home, it can be after lunch, after recess, at the end of the day, 5 minutes when you're, picking up backpacks. How are you guys feeling? Is there something we need to talk about? Or what were some of the good points? Just making sure that you're available for that conversation, which I know as a teacher, especially an elementary teacher, it can be really hard to find that time in the day. Your schedule oftentimes is built for you minute by minute, and we don't always get that stopping time for that social emotional learning, but it's super important to add that in and to make sure that you're doing it, even as a parent as well. When your student gets in the car and you're driving home from the car rider line, you're picking them up, questions, like, can you tell me some good things? Can you tell me some good points that happened today? Is there anything you need to talk about? How are you feeling? A lot of those open-ended questions are important to gauge how students are doing with coping with COVID, or even those regular problems that are still coming up as kids are going through different things. Like upper elementary school kids who might be experiencing puberty or any other changes, that are going on in their lives outside of COVID as well. Um, so just making sure that you're there to talk to them. But I also wanted to share some things I did virtually really quickly. As a virtual teacher, it's important to make the kids still feel like they're part of a classroom. Even though we're not sitting side by side, we might all be on the screen together, like today's meeting. So some of the things I did with that, besides having a morning meeting with my whole entire class, because I also did small groups for reading and math throughout the day, but bringing everyone together so that they get to know each other, letting them speak. Every week, once a week, we had lunch bunch where we just got on and we brought snacks or food or sandwich, and they just talked about whatever they wanted to talk about. And then I have first graders, so, and our whole entire K5 did this. So it works with, all grades. They loved Lunch Bunch. We did show and tell, and even the kids in 3-5 love show and tell because, they might have a new little gadget or something they want to share. And we also did, there's a website, some of you might have heard of it as educators or parents, called Go Noodle. So once a week we would get on, and that was part of what Joy was saying, that social emotional piece of movement, getting stress out through different ways. And so Go Noodle is like a brain break program or website, and it has activities and dances and all kinds of things on there. That's free for students. So we would share our screen and we would dance together, which was really, really fun. And then one more resource, I did send this to Kelly. Maybe we can share it, or I'll try to put the link into the chat a little bit later. But there is a COVID-19 workbook that I found that would really be a great resource for parents, teachers, social workers, counselors, called Helping Children and Families Cope with the COVID-19 Pandemic. It's by a professor, PhD of psychology and education at the University of Florida. And it has some excellent points. And it has just some of the areas in the workbook, and it's great. It's child-friendly, printable, positive ways to cope, keeping a routine, reducing media exposure, as we talked about, staying healthy and fit through exercise, crafts, and other outlets, giving thanks and showing gratitude, staying, related to try to connecting with friends and family and other things, overcoming fears and worries that they may have going back into the classroom related to COVID-19, coping with angry feelings, coping with sadness and loss, which a lot of students are experiencing, as Joy mentioned as well, and creating a calm down corner, which I have done in my classroom when I have had a classroom. But even as parents, you can always have a safe space in your home that's relaxing for our kids to go to as well, to experience some of those things, and have some things, whether it's fidgets or poppets or a bean bag and a book, something cozy, or an area where they can relax. This workbook has some great resources and ideas that would be helpful for everyone.
Great.
So thank
Kelly,
you all.
thank you so much. This was really energizing and so many great ideas. And as a reminder, we'll send the notes out and the resources that are discussed here to everybody after. So thank you so much for talking about that K-5 piece. And I'm thinking about kind of those comfort corners for our middle and high schoolers as well. I wish we
Yes.
would have thought of that strategy a long time ago. So we're going to turn it over now to Richard Jones from Communities and Schools to hear a little bit more about the perspective and the folks that he's working with. Are you set, Richard? If you could take yourself off mute, we'll be in great shape.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Jones. I'm with Communities and Schools of Greater Greensboro. It's an affiliate of Communities and Schools, Inc., the nation's #1 dropout prevention program. Our mission is to surround students with a community of support, empowering them to stay in school and succeed in life. Annually, we serve around 3,000 students in Title I schools such as Dudley High School, Smith High School, Harrison Middle School, Jackson Middle School, Wiley, and Rankin, and a number of other schools as well. Each one of our schools has a site coordinator who secures resources to the schools. I say that we become a huge support to the teachers because they don't have to worry about getting food or clothing to the students. We kind of help take care of those issues, but also a great support to the kids because now they can focus on their learning and not focus on those things. In particular, I'm over a program called the African American Male Initiative, which is a program for African American and other boys at Wiley Elementary, Jackson Middle School, and Smith High School. We actually have a feeder school pattern where we follow the boys from elementary school all the way up through high school. And so they have a mentor in their life from elementary school all the way through high school. And so we've had 3 graduating classes, and the numbers have been amazing. Those mentors make a weekly contact with those kids at school or in the community. With COVID, obviously, we haven't been able to do that in person. So over the last year and a half, we've been meeting with the kids virtually. So the first question, what is unique about the way that COVID may have impacted our population of kids that I work with in particular? The obvious answer is limited access to technology, to the internet, to transportation, which put our kids at a disadvantage because oftentimes our kids are the ones who may not have those type of resources in the house. This is further widened by, or further widening the academic gap that was already there associated with poverty. But as it relates to my line of work, there are 3 areas that come to mind: enrichment, broken relationships, and as everyone has said before me, mental health challenges. There's a guy by the name of Robert Marzano who says the number one contributor to academic achievement is academic background knowledge. And he says that academic background knowledge is cultivated through academic experiences, which is enrichment. One of the ways that we have tried to come against that and make sure that our kids are acquiring the academic background knowledge and are exposed to resources was through mentorship. And we needed to do that because he suggests that the average child growing up in poverty stays within an 8-mile radius of their home until they turn 13 years old. And so their worlds are very small. They may go to school and come home. They go to church, come home, but they generally stay within an 8-mile radius. Well, I tell people the average textbook is written from a middle class standpoint. So the textbook assumes that those kids have had those type of experiences. So oftentimes they're at a disadvantage, not because they can't cognitively answer the questions, but because of their limited experiences in life, which leads into the next challenge that COVID presented was those broken relationships. Oftentimes it was those relationships where they were exposed to the zoo, the Natural Science Center, to a museum or to a library because of a relationship that they had with some type of mentor that was either brokered at the school or at church. We know that for a while people were afraid to even go to church. And so the research also suggests to us that children growing up in poverty, they have fewer additional caring adults in their lives outside of their personal families. Well, oftentimes it was the school where they supplemented those type of relationships, whether it was the school social worker who helped them get food when they didn't have food, who they were able to be very transparent with about clothing, whether it was the guidance counselor who they were able to divulge things to that they didn't share with anyone else, whether it was a football coach who was able to make a connection with that kid and motivate that kid, basketball coach who was able to hold the kid accountable, cheerleading coach. You know, COVID kind of separated people. And if it impacted anyone the most, it was the kids growing up in poverty because they already didn't have as many additional caring relationships with adults. And so those are the two things that comes to mind. And the one that everyone has mentioned, I won't speak on long because that's not my area of expertise, but mental health. I've seen some kids who I've known. The vantage point I have in my program is I've had boys from second grade, and I've been in their life since from second grade all the way through high school. And we are beginning to see behavior from these young men that I would never expect to see. And we know there's a direct correlation between what is actually going on with the alienation and a lot of the hopelessness that kids are feeling because of COVID. So what they need, what they'll need for a smooth transition, I would say patience, empathy, creativity on the adults' behalf, and renewed structure. The kids have been through a lot over the past 2 years. If there's a population of people who don't have the resources to seek out the mental health assistance that they may need, it's going to be the kids oftentimes in poverty. And then you couple that with mental health issues being taboo in those communities is really a huge obstacle there. So a lot of our kids were going through things pre-COVID, all right? And so you add COVID on top of that, it has really been a huge obstacle for us. We have to discipline ourselves as adults, that as we begin to observe some of these things, not to be too harsh in our judgments and some of the disciplines that we try to bring down on the kids. You know, I'm a 43-year-old, 280-pound man, and I tell you, COVID has had an impact on me. You know, and so definitely it's going to have an impact on our kids, and we have to be patient with them as they come back. I say we're going to have to be creative. The world didn't stop just because COVID happened. We still want our kids to dream and to grow. We want them to still go to college and pursue different job opportunities. So we have to be creative. Our kids, they're already you know, privy to technology, the Zooms, and they were already doing those things. We're the ones trying to get caught up. But there are platforms that we could take advantage of to take our kids on virtual tours. You know, I have kids who I'm experiencing now who I just knew had a desire to go to college. Relationships are huge for kids who are growing up in poverty. All right. That's one of the greatest resources for kids growing up in poverty. It's not money, It's not education, it's their resources, it's their relationships. And so, when they lose those relationships, so I have kids who are thinking about not going to college because they're afraid, they have anxiety, and they don't want to lose the relationships that they have. And so we're gonna have to be creative, keep exposing them to these college tours, the upward bounds. The school system, they had to do what they could to keep the kids safe. So they oftentimes wouldn't allow in volunteers in the school. But again, it goes back to relationships that those kids have formed with people who their parents may not have been taking them on college tours. It was the upward bounds, it was the mentors, and now they've lost those things. And so we have to continue to be creative. I had 2 interns from A&T and I think it was GTCC who created a virtual, it was job interviews. They took the kids, taught the kids on how to do a job interview through Zoom. And both of those kids went on a job interview and were offered the jobs. And so I think we're going to have to be creative as we continue to try to support the kids in these times.
Rashard, thank you so very much. I learned so much from your presentation, especially about the role that we adults play. And we're going to shift. Thank you so much. We're going to shift over to talking about those adult roles. And we invite Lisa from the Kellen team to talk a little bit more about parents. We've heard some really solid suggestions. So Lisa's going to talk about parents, and then we have Kenya Donaldson to talk about the perspective of teachers and what teachers need. So we'll turn it over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Mary, and hi, everyone. And again, I am Lisa from CRI, the Child Response Initiative, family advocate for the Kellen Foundation, working directly with GPD in order to help prevent further trauma caused by various incidents, which have obviously been created and show us the active, if you will, case reports that let us see directly what families are going through. I don't want to be Debbie Downer. I have enjoyed Joy and Kelly and definitely Rashad. And really talking from the standpoint of Rashad, he spoke more to what I and myself, along with Melanie, deal with, working with the families that are connected with those incident reports that I just got finished mentioning. So when we think about how those parents are impacted, I'm going to just give you some definites. And I say Debbie Downer because when I'm talking to them, I have to hear the chaos. So even the phone call to follow up on what could be domestic violence, what could be homelessness situation. They're in hotels, staying in very unstable environments, and they're either completely unemployed or underemployed. They're dealing with divorce and separation and husbands leaving, and now they're single family homes, and so many more disparities that are connected to these families. And most of them are among our Black and Brown communities, and they are suffering in a greater way. So what Rashad just said about putting it on top of, like you're adding it to. So now COVID-19. So when we say what the CDC is saying, and wash your hands more and do this and wear your mask. I mean, they're not even thinking about how do I protect myself from this disease versus how do I protect myself, quote unquote, from the disease of poverty. So there's so many other things going on. And I can only tell you, just even speaking yesterday to a mom, I'd just rather give you hard hits of what's going on. And I talked to her yesterday, and while talking to her, her daughter was virtually, just like Kelly was just saying, when she was saying how everything virtual and you have to help them and engage. Well, what do you do when the broadband width is not enough, right? So she can't get the internet to stay. So she's trying to talk to me, and the child is crying, running in and saying, I can't get it to work. It won't stay on, and I can hear all this right in the background. And she's like, I'm so sorry. I said, it's okay. And I'm following up with her for something completely different. And this man that's punching on her, and she's letting him in and out, because what is she going to do without the help? So I'm talking about live actions, things that are happening that are hypersensitive, that parents can't breathe. They can't take the breather. They cannot, if you want to say relax for a minute and lay it down, there is no laying it down. How can I lay it down? Because she also had a 2-year-old at the same time screaming, pick me up, all this going on in the background. So what do we do? How do we help them? And how do we, tell them the things? And when one of the parents I talked to just a couple days ago, that parent was saying, I can't wait until my child goes back to school. Like, I think her child was 14. I cannot wait to get him out of this house. You know, he won't stay on the computer. He won't listen to me. My life is upside down. I can't take it. So we have parents that are absolutely overwhelmed. Rashad took all of the things that I would absolutely say. I put on here in, you know, big capital letters: empathy, 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 and relationship, relationship. Because so many times the children that are on the outside need the relationship, but guess who else needs it? The parent needs the relationship. So now when some of them might have intensive in-home coming in, and now they're scared to let them in, or the, you know, the person, the actual therapist don't even want to come to the house right now. So I think someone else mentioned that I think Joyce talked about how the therapist, you know, they might be walking out of the agency the same way teachers are walking out of the classrooms. It's the same situation. So you're trying to get people there. So I just think we need to get to a place where we are providing resources in order to help them prepare for the transition that needs to take place, in order to find out, like, what else is there. I'm not even trying to toot the horn of Kellen, but Kellen does also do, you know, peer support. So how do we then engage back with these parents to be able to help them cope with their everyday stuff? You know, they have to be able, if you're going to say to them, breathe, you're going to say to them, sit back and relax and do this exercise, and you're trying to tell the child to do it, mom has to do it first. Mom has to get the shot in order to even make sure she's protected, if she believes in what that is. I talk to so many that will have nothing to do with it. So now if mother is not wearing the mask, dad is not wearing the mask, how are you going to be able to tell the child they need to put a mask on when they go to school? So we have to do things now. It's almost like I'm thinking, can we go to some of these rec centers? Can we go on site to where some of these families are and just do more talks and hand out things and show them what's necessary, because they need to prepare their children. So when the teachers are trying to tell the kids, this is what you need to do, you know, stay 6 feet apart, do this, let's practice this, practice that. Well, if it's not practiced in their home and they already are belligerent about it, then they're going to be just as the same with those that are in authority in the school. Because my mama don't do it, I don't have to do it. So we have to go back again to psychoeducation to keep them safe on all angles. You know, the things that we know, you know, we're privileged on this call right here. We're privileged to hear all these wonderful experts, right? Those experts and everything that each person is saying, somehow it needs to translate into the homes. So I'm not going to take up any more time. I know we're running late, but basically we need to find a way to connect directly with these parents so that they can then learn some of the things that they need to do to show their children. Because if they don't get the psychoeducation, because this now is about layered prevention, right? Putting strategies in place, starting in the home. So if they're in the home and can't even function, then how are we going to be able to get to them enough to know about layered prevention so that their children will be healthy, so that the teachers and all their other classmates can be healthy? It has to start at the home. But you're talking about breaking barriers, literally punching walls down in order to even be able to get there. So we just have to stay closer together. And that key word, relationship with each other, relationship with these families, and doing our best to connect so that they can help their children.
Lisa, I'm seeing so many head nods and so many amens, virtual amens for what you just shared. And thank you so much for putting a point on this piece about relationships and the multi-generational approach that is needed. So appreciate you and your passion and all of the great work that you're doing. And speaking of fantastic work, we're going to turn it over to Kenya Donaldson from the Guilford County Association of Educators to talk a little bit about the teacher perspective.
And I promise I won't keep you long. It's so powerful to hear the others share what teachers have experienced with their families along the way. It's so powerful, and it pulls forth so many emotions just as an educator myself. I am the president of GCAE, and one of the things that we do is we represent the 10,000 employees across Guilford County, as well as all of the students that we serve. And one of the questions that I want to address is, how did COVID uniquely impact educators? And really, I think for most of us, COVID forced us to change education on a dime, where we were initially, just needing enough copy paper. We had to shift from even using papers to understanding how to make learning real for so many in the community. With so many in our community just overnight. The other shift was how public our practice became. If you can imagine 10,000 employees all of a sudden doing their work from day to day in a very public place where parents, where whoever was in the room could literally see your practice at work, and how basically the implementation dip of virtual learning, which comes with any new implementation. You start something new, you're going to have a learning dip in it. You're going to have to learn how to navigate this new platform. And those mistakes were all on public display. And so for our educators, that was an incredible shift. And then we could parallel that with all of the publicity that we got in the news as well as on social media. So, we went from those who were loyally supportive of educators and they recognized how hard educators were working to get this done, to those who truly didn't even believe we were still working, and would have possibly taken wages from educators because they didn't value what we were offering. There was a shift around trusting educators that educators had to endure that I think was sort of unprecedented in this time. And so with that, our educators had to learn to be the public face of education. While we were displaying very resilient attributes, we were positive, upbeat, we were motivated by the challenge publicly. But for a lot of us, there was an internal crisis going on for our students, for ourselves, and like what many of you said, even for parents. The deprivatization went both ways. So while our classroom and our homes were open to parents and to the community, we were then the community was also open to us. So we had to really deal with students who were fearful and how to have them feel comfortable in this situation. Students experiencing depression, families feeling hopeless in this situation, and figuring out, because we've always been the problem solvers in education. If a kid had a problem, we figured out how to solve it. During COVID, there was a lot of problems we could not solve, and that brought hopelessness for us, hopelessness for families. There was a huge shift in self-efficacy. You had these master teachers who are, and I'm not going to say were, who are still dominating the craft of education and can, teach a rock if they had to, but they had to teach it in a different way. And that felt a lot differently in the way that we process our understanding of ourselves as educators. And so it did take its toll on us. We had to hold it together for the community because we knew the community needed us. We had to hold our dignity together for our students and for everyone that we were serving. And so after a while, of course, things leveled out, but it didn't level out as long as we knew there was one kid we couldn't reach, one kid that didn't show up to class, one child or family that was in crisis that we couldn't be there for. We had to really shift the way we did education and the way we understood education. And we did. Some of the things we had to do was revision and rethink about what we call student learning. Like Rashad said earlier, our students now know how to set up Zoom, send emails, they can plan a meeting, they can facilitate conversations virtually. And these are all things that many educators struggled doing at the beginning of COVID. And so when you start to look at some of the strengths and positives that our students came out on the other side of this, there are things we can celebrate. I've also been asked to talk about what are some of the things that we can do to facilitate the transition this year. And I think it goes back to a lot of thinking about student-centered approaches to what we do in education. This is a perfect opportunity for us to reset our understanding of student learning. Re-image the concept of learning loss. Re-image what some would call the COVID slide, and let's focus on student strengths as opposed to their weaknesses, providing our students an opportunity to avoid the defined deficit model. Deficit models do nothing but put our students in these tight holes of understanding or misunderstanding of who they are as a learner and what they contribute to the classroom. And so when we take an opportunity to look at their strengths and what students bring to the table to begin our understanding of their learning, then we have an opportunity to start there as we move forward in learning. And so one of the things that's really important as we transition back is this balanced approach to wants and needs. When we look at the academic versus social, we have to have a balanced approach to that. If we go in and we're just going to all of a sudden get every kid reading on grade level by the end of first quarter, we're going to be neglecting so much of the child. We have to allow our educators, we have to allow our schools opportunities to recover. As I mentioned earlier, there's an implementation dip every time you do a transition or change a method that you're doing. So back on March 13th, a year ago, we had a change. We went to virtual learning. We all saw that very public implementation dip in public education. We stayed on virtual learning for a year and a half, and for some, we figured it out, and for some, we never did. Well, we're about to return back to our classrooms. We are all very excited about that. We know the best way students learn is face-to-face. For most of our scholars, face-to-face instruction is what they need to achieve their fullest academic potential. Please expect that there may be an implementation dip on the part of the teacher as well as on the part of the student, and give some grace and mercy when it comes to us getting back into the swing of this face-to-face instruction that we have not done in over a year. And so I think one of the things is prioritizing the overall child when we return, balancing the needs of the academic recovery based on student strengths and what they already know, as well as the whole child with health and social wellness. And I believe it was Kelly who mentioned earlier, allowing educators that social emotional learning opportunities that it's going to take to rebuild communities, rebuild educational environments that are conducive to our students settling right back in to these amazing schools that we have here in Guilford County. And I will even say our charters, because I do realize we have a lot of charter school students in our area. And so that's some of the biggest things that I think we need in this transition is more focus on student learning, less focus on student scores. Scores are not always reflective of what our students are learning. We hope that that becomes more succinct and aligned as time progresses. But when we look at what our students are learning and focus more on you have learned this, you have learned this, and you have learned this, as opposed to did you make honor roll this time? that's the type of transition we have to expect, because in order for teachers to meet the students' needs, we have to meet them where they are when they walk back into the room. And one of the things we know after a year of digital learning and virtual learning is that every student is coming back in the classroom with different needs and with different strengths. So I think that's some of the biggest things that is going to help us have a very dynamic and amazing school year, where we can measure real success, real learning, and support students across our district. And I know this was supposed to be all about teachers, but believe it or not, supportive teachers is supportive students. And that's one of our biggest mottos in GCAE, is that when you support a teacher, you're actually supporting thousands of students that teacher touches. And so we thank you for an opportunity to just sort of share our needs that we're going to need this school year in this transition back to face-to-face learning.
And I'm not sure if you can see the comments as you were talking, but you have a whole lot of support from this group about the concept of whole child and really paying attention and being intentional. So thank you so much. And a huge thanks to all of our panelists, Joy, Kelly, Richard, Lisa, and Kenya. This has just been fantastic. And I hope we will share your contact information with folks as well, if that's okay with everybody. And keep the questions coming in chat, folks. We're a few minutes over. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly, and we'll share a couple of other resources with you just through the notes instead. So turning it over to Kelly Graves.
All right, thanks for hanging with us and all of this wonderful information, all the panelists, thank you so much. We'll send a summary of the resources that were shared, as well as some of the resources that we may not have been able to get to in a follow-up email, and you'll have that. But before we sign off, we just wanted to invite you to join us in September through the end of the calendar year. We're going to be launching into a 3-month strategy and action planning time to really thinking about what can we do as a network to move the needle. And in addition to the conversations that we're having, the so what do we do with that next? What kinds of action steps can we take to collectively work together to support our community? And so that conversation will be launching in September. We invite you to join us. More information will be coming out on that soon. So without further ado, we'll wrap up for the day. You'll get a copy of the conversation today was recorded, so we'll make sure you send you the link to that and the follow-up resources. If you have other resources you want to add to the chat box to make sure that they get into that handout, please feel free to do so now. And until we see you again soon, please stay safe, be well, and thank you for everything that you're doing to help support our community. Have a great day.